Welcome to another edition of Doctor and the Dude. I'm Dr. Jim Siebert, and the Dude is Josh Morganman. Josh, how are you doing today?
Awesome. Nice to be back in the United States.
Yes, it is. Well, we're going to talk about Hurricane Agatha today. So that was a storm that you recently rode out, and we're going to kind of break things down. So let's first start with when you are after a hurricane and you're trying to pursue it, you are really trying to get to the eye wall itself. Explain why that is so important for what you're doing.
Yeah, actually, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get right into the eye to get a central pressure reading with one of these things. This is my trusty Kestrel weather meter. I actually have a bunch of these. And the reason you want to get into the eye is because the air pressure in the eye is a good indicator. It's a good, it's a strong signal for how strong the hurricane is. Based on the central pressure, you can do some calculations to estimate the sort of maximum sustained wind speed. And the reason that's useful, when hurricanes are coming ashore in very rural areas or areas that don't have weather stations on the ground, sometimes the pressure readings I get in the eye are the only data that exist. So I send those data to the Hurricane Center afterward, and it gives them the missing puzzle piece to understand, okay, what happened and how strong was it exactly?
So how is the information going from your Kestrel to being able to save it so you can send it to the National Hurricane Center?
Well, the devices log the data, and then afterward, I sort of chart them, on the computer after the hurricane and look at what happened, and it's really cool to kind of analyze it because the lowest pressure that you get, that's one important indicator of what happened, but another is the actual pattern. So as a hurricane approaches, the pressure goes down, and then as it starts to move away, it goes up. So you get this V-shaped pressure trace. Now, in some hurricanes, it's not a perfect V. You get crazy fluctuations and weird things happening. And I had a lot of that weird stuff in Hurricane Agatha's core.
Well, so let's break down Agatha. So as it made landfall, what did you see? And tell us about what you found out from the storm.
Hunting hurricanes in this part of Mexico is very challenging because there's no radar coverage. It's not like in the United States where we have radar everywhere. So I have to hunt the storm using visible satellite imagery, and it's hard trying to get into that center. And also, you have these widely spaced towns with just some jungles in between them. It's really challenging. I got as close as I could. I ended up in a town called Mazunte, and then we lost all communication as the hurricane moved in. So then I had no idea what it was doing, and everything I knew about the hurricane was just based on, okay, what's the air pressure doing and what's the direction of the wind? The center of the hurricane passed very close to Mazunte. We missed the eye by probably about 2 miles, really close. Now, what that means is Mazunte was in the strongest part of the hurricane. It was in what's called the inner right front quad, which is the most intense part of the eye wall, passed right over Mazunte. And I'll tell you, man, it was intense.
Yeah, so for people to understand it, as the hurricane is swirling around, that it's the side that's actually swirling, getting pushed into landfall, and it's also where the storm surges are the worst, the winds are the worst. It's just it's the worst place to be, and of course, that's exactly where you were.
Exactly, and you made a good point, Dr. Jim, that in the right front quad on that side, you have the winds blowing onshore, so it's pushing the water, pushing the storm surge onto land, which of course is a big threat.
So tell us, what did you see then with this system as it made landfall and then as it pushed away from you and the pressure started to rise?
The thing I noticed about this hurricane, it surprised me how strong it was. It didn't, when you looked at the infrared and visible satellite imagery, it didn't look amazing. But what I noticed afterward, when I looked at the microwave imagery, and as you know, that's like taking an X-ray of the hurricane, it really shows the structure and what's happening underneath. It looked like it was re-strengthening at landfall, so it had this nice, perfect closed eye wall. And on the ground, that meant really intense conditions. This was officially a Category 2. I'll tell you, if it was a Category 2, it was the most intense one I've been in because those winds were intense.
Now, something else that you do that I find really important is that after the storm has passed, you talk to people and interview people to get more information about what they saw and also the damage that they may have also had been inflicted on them.
Yeah, so after the hurricane, my partner and I, we drove up and down the highway looking at the way trees fell and stuff like that, and also interviewing eyewitnesses to understand what happened. And we figured out that the eye passed about 2 or 3 miles west of Mazunte. We could tell by the way the trees fell, and also we talked to some workers at a gas station who described a calming, like a sort of a calm period, which was obviously the eye. So this was a small hurricane, but a very intense one. And the air pressure data afterwards shows some very interesting things.
I'm curious. So, for example, what did you see, or what would you share then with like the National Hurricane Center?
So the lowest pressure was 978.9 millibars. So that suggests because we're outside the eye, probably the pressure in the center was in the low or mid 970s, which is, that's pretty low. And that suggests it possibly could have been a little stronger than understood. But the other thing was crazy, crazy pressure fluctuations as the center was getting close to Mazunte. That's indicative of possible mesovortices, which are these little swirly things that are inside the eye wall. They're more localized. They're sort of smaller swirls inside the bigger swirl, and that's where you can get some really intense winds and some sort of streaks of very heavy damage. And the pressure trace was very strongly indicative when you see those crazy zigzags of some mesovortices passing through the region, which is interesting stuff.
Well, and that makes sense because a hurricane is really thousands of storms working in conjunction to make one gigantic storm.
Exactly. An eye wall is basically it's a chain of very intense thunderstorms with like microburst action happening and just kind of like you said, sort of coordinating together and working as a circle.
Well, we've got the first storm down. We've got plenty more, I'm sure, that are going to continue during the coming hurricane season. But Josh, thanks for that inside information. It's interesting not only that you're hunting these hurricanes, but the data that we get. And I can't wait to see more of what's going to happen. Of course, we don't want the hurricanes, but it's certainly a good way to find out more about them. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. We will see you next time.